So before Susie begins, I'd like to give a few words of introduction to give you a bit on her background. So Susie Moser, Dr. Susanne Moser, is director and principal researcher of Susanne Moser Research and Consulting. Her expertise is in equitable adaptation and transformation in the face of climate change. She focuses on climate change communication to drive social change, and she facilitates effective interaction between scientists, policymakers, and the public. She is a personification of what we mean by a transformations practitioner, straddling science and practice, and contributing in so many different domains in which we need to operate in order to be effective in transformation. She contributed to the 4th and 5th assessment reports of the Working Group 2 of the IPCC. She participated in the Scientific Steering Committee for the special report on the impacts of 1.5 degrees Celsius and the associated emissions. She's a member of a federal advisory committee on the 3rd U.S. National Climate Assessment. She co-leads that committee's Engagement and Communications Working Group. She's also, this list goes on and on. These are just the highlights. She served on scientific advisory boards for Future Earth, the International Science Council, the International Human Dimensions Program, the U.S. National Research Council, and numerous other organizations. Susie is everywhere. So welcome and thank you for joining us, Susie Moser.
Thank you, Bruce. Really, really kind introduction. And thank you to you for inviting me to be with you as well. It's been almost unbearable to not be able to be with you in person. And I am just so grateful for making this possible by the particular format you have chosen, this hybrid conference. So as Bruce mentioned, there is a bit of a tradition of my showing up in one way or another during these transformation conferences. I've been to 5 out of 6, but many of you don't know this tradition. And so I'm going to, for those of you who are familiar, there will be some elements that you are familiar with. And for those of you who are not, hopefully this is a good way to go out on. And so what I want to start with is to simply invite you to sit back for a moment and take a deep breath. It's been a really, really full week. And I want to invite you to, let me just quickly do a little logistical thing here. I want to invite you to simply let this particular week come back in your memories. end here at this particular one because so many of us are trying to make connections from all over the world, and including through this technology that we're now using. It has been such a full week, both for you in person, having to choose between many, many different sessions, and for those of us online, trying to juggle time zones and, participating in both Australia and in Prague to this amazing conference. And all I want to say about that is I have a serious case of FOMO despite all of that. It's been incredible what you have put online, what we have been able to participate even remotely, and still there is some sense that there is just not a lot that surpasses being together in person. I will say, however, that being online has enabled me to meet colleagues again and again in these sessions from, say, Finland, Indonesia, somewhere in Africa, and North America, all at the same time. A kind of diversity that is just so amazing, that we now are able to make possible through this technology. And so I want to start with my own thank you. And of course, you have now already heard a lot of the thank yous, but I want to put all of these, the core, the hubs, if you will, in each of these different places and online in the center. And we know that around all of them, as you just heard, are whole regional teams that are not all on the slide because they don't fit. And there are the logistics and tech mavens, the online facilitators, the community weavers, session facilitators on site, the catalysts, the sense makers of the themes that we've had, the graphic note takers, as you saw, amazing work that was done in Australia to be able to participate. And thank you to all the photographers that I have just, rudely taken from to introduce us to this particular session. And of course, all of you, the speakers, the panelists that gave such rich context to this, and all the other participants all around the world that just made it possible, along with the people who actually funded it. There is just nothing that goes, that happens without each of you contributing in the particular ways you did. And I just want to add my own thank you. So big round of applause again for every single one, including you. Now, one of the things that, is part of this, for me, really remarkable experience of participating remotely is that I mentioned already the sense of missing out on something, but isn't it in many ways reflective of the transformation of our world that we need to participate in, and that is happening, but that we may or may not always see, right? We're particularly involved in one corner of the world, and we might not see what's happening at another corner that is equally important. And, we may never know about it and may actually miss out on what's happening and what important things are happening. And I want to say, for me, having this experience of not being there, having this experience of missing out, for me was a microcosm of what it's like to be in a transformative time in the world. What I do bring to this, as Bruce mentioned in the introduction, is a bit of a long-term perspective on it. We've done this now over 10 years. You see the different conferences and the different themes that we've had all along the way. And it enables me to see some things that I might, that someone who's just been here for the first time might not see. So one of the things that has come out of this particular tradition of my speaking to attendees of transformations conferences on almost each one of these, except for the one in Stockholm, is that I look at what are the themes that are emerging, and that's, you know, the benefit of this long-term perspective. One of the things I've done at each one of these is to create a Wordle out of all your paper abstract titles. So this is what it looks like, and it's messy, but let me highlight a few things that sort of go beyond the, you know, the main theme, which is transformation. Look at how much we now emphasize partnerships, relationships, communities, and there are many more words together and others that all speak to this growing theme of how we work, how we do this. A lot of emphasis this time on the issue of systems and the recognition that an outer system change requires that inner system change, but also a lot of emphasis now on what are the approaches, what are the practices, what are we learning, what are the capacities we need to do that. And again, we could pick out a number of other words that are all in that same sense around practice and praxis. And so for me, what I find is notable as a different element of this year's transformation conference is that the focus on the work, the inner and the outer work. And of course, you could say, well, that's partly driven by the themes that we've had in this conference. Absolutely. It is certainly nudging us to move in that direction. But of course, what words you use to speak to any one of those themes, that is yours. So it is still a bottom-up reflection of where you think we are at this time. And another driver, I think, is simply this. While you were, you know, in your respective locations, this is what happened in countries and regions of the world. Some of these, except for Guam, is just this week. I could replace that with a picture from, you know, China or from Japan or whatever. It is just devastating. Literally, as we speak, I've had constant ticks on my computer, my phone, about the state of the flood in the river that I live near, Connecticut River, and whether or not it is going over the banks, flushing all the lives lost and the homes and things lost in Vermont and New York down the river, and waiting to sweep into my community. So this is also driving us, right? Or what is unfolding in terms of heat, record-breaking heat, partly driven by El Nino, but of course that just makes the general trend worse. And again, I could add to this, you know, pictures from Europe right now, or what, you know, so many of us have recently experienced in this part of the corner. Other times it is Australia or in Canada or, you know, in Spain and Portugal. It is just, what is the, almost like, what is the disaster du jour? All of these issues add to the urgencies that we now experience that drive what we need to do. And so the first observation that I want to make about where we are at this point is we're in it now. I feel like that's the key message that I'm taking away from this conference. We're in it now. We're doing the work now. We're in the midst of it, and we may or may not see it. And so one of the things that I would like to contribute to this is to introduce you to this concept of transformative labor. It is the inner and outer, visible and invisible work that is required to initiate, affect, navigate the very challenging processes involved in transformative change. And, you know, as I listened to you over the course of the year, this comes from a project, a research project that I've synthesized that was funded by the International Science Council on Transformations to Sustainability. But as I listened to you through that lens, I kept feeling like, yeah, that's what you're doing too. You are naming what is happening and give voice to people to enable them to name what are the challenges that they're facing, what are the symptoms. You give it legitimacy in many ways, and you know, give a platform for voices that are not usually heard. You create transformative spaces in all these ways in which you do that, dialogue processes, all the different methodologies that you shared at this conference. And so much happens in those places, right? Trust is being built, relationships are being built, new ideas are generated. So much of that is happening. And, you know, in various ways, whether it's building leadership capacities, whether you're building the capacities, a sense of empowerment by simply giving people a space in which they're heard and can connect with each other, you're fostering agency and empowerment that enables us to then enact steps to change. And there, you know, I loved hearing the cases in so many places of where people are actually doing something differently, breaking out of the status quo and doing something differently, moving in that way toward the visions and the desired outcomes that they for themselves have defined. At the center of all of that is deep caring, tending, learning. That's the relational aspect, that you know, partnership. That's the core of what we're doing, and without which it is simply, it doesn't work. There's also a lot of talk in this conference around the different ways of scaling in, up, out, deep. Those are all aspects of the work that we now do. Most of the time, we don't see that, right? It is work that is risky, it's costly, it's transgressive. It is often done by the ones who are not in positions of power. It's ongoing, nonlinear. I don't need to read the whole list, but the point of it is that so much of what this requires is the kind of creativity and courage and persistence that you all demonstrated in your projects. And that is, you know, also demonstrated in that of people you work with who are stepping out of their comfort zone to do something different. So that's one key observation. The other one that I want to say is that we're laboring in this way along the entire transformative arc. Some of us are involved in the powering down, the breaking down, the subverting, the unlearning, letting go and grieving of what has to end, what is ending. Some of us, and this is not separate, this is, you know, more like where are we at any one point in time. Some of us are involved in the reckoning, the sifting through what's worth keeping, what has to change, decolonizing our processes, our minds, our science, or in the words of Ada Sharma, presencing, getting to the very root of who are we, what is worth keeping, who do we want to be in this world. And then some of us are involved in the building of the new, the regenerating, the healing, the innovating, experimenting, learning all the time, right? So it's really important to remember that there are ways in which we can actually map ourselves in terms of where we are, but oftentimes we forget. We can't simply see it. I also want to say something about the challenge of, in the midst of wherever we are and all the stuff that's coming at us, where should we focus? It seems to me, and your work very much demonstrates this, that the reality that we actually live in demands that we tend to all parts of the river. And what I mean by that is downstream, the stuff that's just flying at us right now, we have to learn to navigate and cope with this constant, complex and chaotic issues. In many ways, one of you called it dealing with what is, right? It's just like dealing with what's coming. But many of us are actually involved in supporting the healing and stopping the perpetuation of trauma and pain. That's going further upstream. And then, of course, many of us are involved in becoming agents of transformative change in the way of building entirely new systems that don't produce those kinds of downstream effects. So in the prevention of things. So that's another piece. And then the last piece I want to say is, why are we then here? Right? In many ways, what was so beautiful for me to see is how we come together to, in this marketplace of ideas, sharing and a show and tell of what we do, to kind of show what is happening in other parts of the world that we're not in. This is this amazing opportunity to get a global picture in a way that we don't when we're involved in each one of our unique opportunities. And I want to say, it also then raises for me the issue of what's not here. What are we not looking at? What are we not seeing? And I want to put this simply out there as maybe an offering to think about what the next conference could be about. The pieces that are missing were, I think it was Michael Cohen-Patton and some others who framed what we're doing in the poly crisis. But I don't see us really grappling with that complexity, with things falling apart all at the same time. I would love us to spend more time on that. I want us to spend more time with people who have resigned, who have given up, who we cannot bring into the fold. How do we bring them back? Is it possible? How do we deal with both resistance to change and the reticence, oftentimes the retribution and violence and the reactionary regimes and forces that seem to be popping up left and right? It seems to me there is a degree of challenge that we might forget almost by this happy gathering of being together and just learning from each other. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. I'm just saying there's something else that I feel like, at least in the reality that I live in, we need to spend more time with some of these very hard realities. And so I want to end, and this is another bit of a tradition. I haven't done it every year, but this year the muse inspired me. I want to end with a poem that arose out of your own words. And it begins with this title, and this is why I need you. Because we're in it now, and it is dark, and it is frightening, and I can't see clearly on my own. Because we're all in it now, and it is hot, too dry, too wet, and I lose sight without you of where we are and where we're going. Because alone, I cannot find that reasonable balance between disappointment and hope. Because you help me build muscle memory of how change happens. By scaling in and scaling out, you help me see where we are and what to do. You show me who we are and who we have been and who we may yet become, the kind of people Earth needs now. Because alone, I can find a safe space, but only with you does it become a brave space. And I must be brave now because I don't see the need for change shrinking or slowing, and my zone of influence is just 2 arm lengths worth. Because the seeds I sow and the seeds you sow have still low visibility. And if you wouldn't help me see them, I'd go crazy. Also, because there's peace and promise and power in that shared silence. Because I'm tired and I cannot read all that you know, and yet there is so much I must learn and so much more I must unlearn. Also, because with you, I can remember that I don't have to know or do everything, but find my place and start where I am, do what I can, use what I have. And if you do the same, it is enough. Because you disrupt my old stories and offer up new ones. Because I had forgotten about the prophecy of how to subvert the palaces of power until you told me about Trojan mice. Because common sense is not yet legislated, but at least together we can cultivate a shared intent. And if we don't get funded, at least we can pool the little we have and still be free. Because you remind me that it is precisely in the obstacles we meet that our work lies. And that together we are bolder in our thinking and actions, in our connections and reflections. Because the mirror you hold up by being you is precisely the one I need to look inside of me. And because if you hold up one end and I the other of the polarities between us, something may yet give and something new may yet come forth. Because together we can liberate our minds and reimagine our futures, reimagine ourselves, become indigenous again. Because together we are tamkeen, the potential in the seed meeting the favorable conditions for its flourishing. because together we are the future, which is not a time, but a possibility looking back at us, knowing intimately that it depends on each one of us. Thank you.